Women are being conscripted into the army as Europe gears up for war. The UK is looking on closely, weighing up whether to draft women as Denmark launches mandatory conscription for females.
In the world situation we're in right now, it's necessary to have more conscripts, and I think that women should contribute to that equally as men do. So actually I think it's a positive change, but I do think that a lot of women as well as men that might be forced to get into the military, it hasn't been like that in many years. I think it'll be a change.
But shifting a military from its male focus to incorporating women has its issues.
There are different things that they need to improve, especially in terms of equipment. Right now it's made for men, so perhaps like the rucksacks are like a bit too large and the uniforms are large as well.
Well, today 24% of the conscripts are females, but they are joining on a voluntary basis. From 1st of July, they will be obligated to show up at the Defence Day and on an equal basis as for men join the conscription period.
Danes generally have a positive feeling about it.
I think it's a good thing. I think it's great that we're doing equal things in all ways, both in military but also in jobs and everything. If we want to be equal, it should both be in military and private and in all our job functions. So yeah, I think it's a really good thing.
The UK has been studying options for defence as global tensions escalate and the continent fears war with Russia. Women were conscripted for military work toward the end of World War II. But not for fighting on the front lines. Any modern iteration could require them to fight. The government has noted countries around Europe have returned to mandatory national service as the threat posed by Russia increases. In a 2019 report, the UK noted Norway had expanded its conscription to women, who were obliged to undergo a fitness test, and the best performers were selected, whether they liked it or not. Where some countries with forced conscription might expect to see young people deliberately flunking their tests, Norway's approach made the selection even more competitive, with young men and women giving their best. Last year, a NATO chief warned Europe needs to step up its defence.
The big difference with a year ago, I would say, Terry, is that there's a lot of things that have happened in the armed forces and in the defence organisations. What hasn't happened is in our societies the understanding that it is more than the military that has to be able to operate in a conflict or in a war. It is the whole of society that will get involved, whether we like it or not. That realization, we didn't talk about that much a year ago. If you look back to last year, what has happened in our alliance with regard to the battle groups that we set up, if you look back to the training, the fact that we now have Steadfast Defender with 90,000 troops, that is a record number. That is a record number of troops that we can bring to bear and have an exercise with in that size. Across the alliance, across the ocean, from the US to Europe, in Europe. That is a big change.
The UK launched a strategic review and announced it would be upping its spending.
The threat we now face is more serious, more immediate, and more unpredictable than at any time since the Cold War. A new era in the threats that we face demands a new era for defence and security. Not just to survive in this new world, but to lead. We will never gamble with our national security. Instead, we will act in the national interest.
The first duty of the UK Prime Minister is the safety and security of our citizens, and that's a duty I take extremely seriously. We've already increased our defence spend to 2.5% in 2027, and I've been absolutely clear where the money for that comes from. We've cut the overseas development aid budget, and we will now make commitments, our NATO commitments, to 5%. That includes a resilience element that we're already spending, but it is important that we make that commitment for the long-term security of our country.
But with widespread disillusionment in the UK, many fear young people would refuse to fight for our country.
The very notion that we still live in an era where trench warfare could break out will come as a shock to some. But here's the bigger point. Poll after poll after poll shows that Brits wouldn't be prepared to take arms for king or queen and country anyway. 38% of the under 40s polled in January would refuse. Only 58% even agree that we should send Brits to Ukraine at all. Why on earth would anybody want to fight for Britain at the moment? They hate the working classes, who historically have been the ones who had to go and cop the bullets.
Well, Martin, I'm not here, of course, to advocate for conscription, but any responsible government looking at how we defend our nation and that of our allies may have to consider it. We've had generations of people in the UK since 1945 who have perhaps taken their security for granted, relative prosperity, of course, and I think that ultimately we may have to accept the fact that the world is a dangerous place, the fact that Russia are clearly more aggressive and more dangerous now than perhaps at any time since the Cold War, and if the balloon goes up, if there's a requirement for us to go to war, perhaps because Russia's invaded an Article 5 NATO country, then so be it. And it may well be that our armed forces have been hollowed out to the extent where we have spent the peace dividend. Therefore, we need to find innovative ways of providing that capability.
But we've got the smallest army since the Napoleonic era. The RAF is as small as it's ever been since its inception in World War I. So few sailors were decommissioning ships. How are we going to recruit? Conscription would mean what? Enforced conscription? You have to go and do it. People would be leaving the country in droves, wouldn't they not?
That's the definition of conscription. It's national service. You could call it a volunteer army. But ultimately, what it would mean is that we rely upon our regular forces, Army, Navy, RAF to deploy, and then to backfill them, we'd need reserves. We need regular reserves. We need people like me, ex-regulars, to come back into uniform, perhaps. There's a scary thought. But also possibility of conscripts. If we need people to do this work, noting that the armed forces have been hollowed out, we may have to go down that road. And, of course, that may require legislation to do it.
Do you honestly think, when you look around the streets of Britain now, that there's a social demographic of people that believe enough in the country to fight? Is there the physical capability? Most people now be offended about their pronouns being offended. Do we seriously have the actual capability? And why not send people like Mike Martin? Why not send the politicians? Lead by example.
Well, I think it's been, to be fair, but I can tell you from experience that in Afghanistan and Iraq, we asked a lot of things of our young people who stepped up to the plate. I saw remarkable people do remarkable things, and I think that that's in everyone. But ultimately, to do that, it's going to require training. It's going to require people. They've got to step forward. Of course, conscription involves necessity. It's compulsory mobilisation, and therefore we have to rely upon our good people of the UK to step up, to train, and to perhaps wield a bayonet.
This was perhaps acknowledged by the government. In a 2025 report into conscription, Pat McFadden said the country wouldn't force conscription, saying that recruiting unwilling young people would damage morale and the overall performance of the military. Nicholas Dunning, GB News.